WWII 15. September 20th, 1944. The fog hasn't lifted yet. It's clinging to the fields like it knows something bad is coming. The ground below is soaked, churned into mud by steel tracks that haven't stopped moving since dawn. Somewhere inside that fog, German tanks are advancing. Panthers, maybe tigers. Nobody on the ground can see them clearly. They can only hear them. This is northeastern France, Lorraine, near Aricourt, and the Americans down there are already in trouble. Sherman tanks are burning, not dramatically, not heroically. They burn the quiet way black smoke-blown turrets cruise that never get the chance to climb out. German armor can kill from farther away. That's the math of it. Cold, simple, and very final. Above it all, circling slowly like a bird that shouldn't be here, is a tiny airplane. Fabric wings, thin struts, an engine with less power than a farm truck. The L-4 Grasshopper. It's not a fighter. It's not even armed. At least it's not supposed to be. Its job is to look, not touch. To observe, to report, to stay alive by being ignored. The Germans usually don't even bother shooting at it. Why would they? It's a toy, a flying lawn chair, a mistake with wings. Inside that cockpit sits Major Charles Carpenter, 32 years old, 47 combat sorties, a high school history teacher before the war, the kind of man who used to explain battles on a chalkboard to bored teenagers. Now he's watching the real thing happen underneath him. And today, his airplane looks wrong. Bolted to each wing strut are metal tubes, 6 of them, 3 per side. Bazookas, real ones. Not hidden, not subtle. Just strapped on like someone ran out of better ideas and decided to gamble instead. Down below, German armor keeps moving. They don't look up. They never do. Observation planes don't kill tanks. Everyone knows that. That's one of the unwritten rules of this war. The other rule is simpler. If you fly low, you die. Carpenter knows both rules. He also knows something else. He spent days circling above burning Shermans calling in coordinates, watching men die while doing exactly what he was trained to do. Observe, report, repeat. Today he's done repeating. The grasshopper vibrates slightly as he banks. The fog swallows the ground again. Somewhere below, American crews are running out of time. This is the contradiction hanging in the air at 06:15 that morning. If Carpenter stays high, stays safe, and does his job the right way, other men will die. If he flies down into the fog toward the tanks, toward the gunfire, toward the math that says he shouldn't survive, he will probably die himself. A fabric airplane against steel monsters. A teacher against tanks. The engine hums steadily, unaware of the argument happening in the cockpit. Carpenter looks forward, hands, steady face, calm, in a way that usually comes right before something very stupid or very brave. If he dives, he dies. If he doesn't, someone else will. And at 06:15 over a muddy field in France, that decision is already being made. 2 days earlier, the fields below had already taught him what losing looked like. Sherman tanks burned in rows scattered across muddy farmland, like wrecked machines nobody bothered to bury. When a Sherman was hit, it didn't explode the way movies pretend it does. It cooked. Ammunition ignited one piece at a time. Heat built up inside until the steel became a sealed oven. Crews didn't die instantly. They tried to get out. Some did. Most didn't. From above, Major Charles Carpenter saw all of it. He circled slowly, steady and useless, doing exactly what an observation pilot was trained to do. He watched German Panthers fire from distances American tanks couldn't answer. He watched Shermans advance anyway, because retreat meant something worse. He watched turrets lift into the air and land 40 feet away like discarded helmets. He watched men stumble out with their uniforms burning, take a few steps and fall. And then he marked the coordinates. That was his job. People like to say, war hardens you. That's not quite right. Sometimes it just teaches you how powerless you are while bad things happen in perfect detail. The Panther was everything the Sherman wasn't. Thicker armor, longer reach, better optics. It could kill you before you even knew it was there. From Carpenter's altitude, the imbalance was obvious. This wasn't courage versus courage. It was steel versus thinner steel, and the result was predictable. The worst part wasn't the killing. It was the waiting. Carpenter would circle for hours, radio humming, binoculars pressed to his face, watching American crews die while he stayed untouched. The Germans rarely shot at him. An L-4 wasn't worth ammunition. It didn't drop bombs. It didn't strafe. It just watched. Someone once joked that the Grasshopper was the safest seat in the war. Carpenter stopped finding that funny. He heard about 2 lieutenants weeks earlier, Merrick and Carson. They'd bolted bazookas onto their Cubs and fired them at German trucks. Trucks. Soft-skinned, unarmored, easy targets. Everyone agreed it was clever. Also reckless. Also something you didn't repeat. The idea stuck anyway. Because trucks didn't kill Shermans. Tanks did. Carpenter kept thinking about the bazooka, about its shaped charge, about thin armor plates, about angles, about the top of a tank, not the front. He thought about how close he flew already, how low he already went. He thought about how everyone assumed observation planes were harmless. Assumptions get people killed. He didn't announce the idea. He didn't ask permission. He walked the muddy strip and found the one ordnance tech who didn't immediately laugh. Then a crew chief who stared at the L-4 for a long moment and said quietly, "If we're doing this, we do it fast." They bolted the tubes on like they were committing a small crime against common sense. Other pilots watched and shook their heads. Someone muttered suicide. Someone else said the Germans would finally start shooting at Cubs for real. That part wasn't wrong. When the work was done, the little plane looked ridiculous, like a scarecrow armed for war. The ground crew gave it a name, Rosie the Rocketer. The nickname spread faster than the logic behind it. Carpenter didn't smile. People called it an observation aircraft. From where he was standing, it had become a front-row seat to a funeral procession, and he was tired of watching. The L-4 Grasshopper had survived the war so far for one simple reason. Everyone ignored it. It was small, light, slow. A fabric kite with an engine. It flew low-circled politely and never bothered anyone. German gunners learned early that shooting at it was a waste of time. The plane didn't attack. It didn't threaten. It just watched and left. That was its protection. And that protection vanished the moment the bazookas went on. Suddenly, the Grasshopper wasn't light anymore. It felt different the instant Carpenter rolled it forward on the muddy strip. He didn't need numbers to know it. The plane hesitated like a tired animal being asked to carry more than it should. The wings flexed a little too much. The engine sounded the same, but now every vibration felt louder. Nobody had tested this. Not in combat. Not anywhere close to it. The bazookas were mounted at an upward angle. That was the only way they could be attached without tearing the wing struts apart. Which meant something simple and terrifying. To fire at a tank on the ground, Carpenter would have to dive the entire airplane toward it. Aim with the nose. Aim with the wings. Aim with his own body. Miss the pull-up, and there would be no second attempt. There were other unknowns. The rockets produced a violent exhaust flame. The wings were fabric treated with chemicals, not armor. Maybe the fire would miss. Maybe it wouldn't. No one knew if the first trigger pull would turn the airplane into a falling torch. The crew chief had shrugged when Carpenter asked, "Only one way to find out, sir." That wasn't reassuring. There was no observer seat this time. No extra eyes. No one behind him to confirm targets or watch his tail. Just Carpenter the engine and 6 tubes of borrowed fire bolted to a plane that had never been designed to fight anything. The fog didn't help. It clung to the fields and roads like a second enemy hiding everything below while offering no cover above. Flying blind meant burning fuel for nothing. Flying low meant flying into gunfire you couldn't see until it was already too late. Carpenter climbed anyway. The Grasshopper rose slowly, heavier than before, the climb shallow and reluctant. He leveled off and tested the controls. The plane answered, but not eagerly. It felt sluggish, annoyed by the weight it was carrying. This wasn't the gentle aircraft he'd flown on artillery spotting missions. This one felt tense, loaded, angry. He banked left, then right. The bazooka tubes tugged at the wings like they wanted to tear free. The fabric creaked. Not loudly, just enough to be noticed. That was worse. Carpenter flew alone through a sky that refused to clear. No applause, no witnesses, no safety net. Just a gamble layered on top of another gamble. The irony wasn't lost on him. The safest plane on the battlefield had become the most fragile one the moment it tried to matter. He looked at the fog ahead, knowing tanks were moving beneath it. Knowing men were dying while he circled and tested controls like this was a training flight. It wasn't. This was the moment where plans ended and consequences began. By noon, there would be no ambiguity left. Either the Grasshopper would prove everyone wrong, or it would burn into the fields like so many Shermans had. Carpenter tightened his grip on the controls. By midday, he would be dead. Or nobody would ever call the L-4 a toy again. The fog didn't disappear all at once. It tore. Small gaps opened first, like someone ripping holes in a dirty curtain. Through those gaps, roads appeared. Tree lines, fields, and then movement. Carpenter saw them almost at the same time. He felt the fuel gauge settle in his mind. One attack. Maybe two passes if everything went perfectly. Which meant it wouldn't. He dropped lower, letting the sun stay behind him. 80 miles per hour. Then a little more. The Grasshopper felt heavy, reluctant, like it already knew what he was about to ask. There they were. Panthers. Dark shapes moving slowly along a road, partly hidden by trees, partly swallowed by lingering mist. 6 of them. Maybe 7. Turrets scanning lazily. Hatches open. Commanders standing upright, confident in armor that had never been challenged by anything flying this low and this fragile. They weren't looking up. They never did. Carpenter pushed the nose down. The horizon tilted. The airspeed crept higher. 85. 90. The wind screamed louder around the bazooka tubes. The wings vibrated, not violently, just enough to remind him they were still made of fabric. This was the part no one had rehearsed. At 100 meters, the lead Panther filled his windshield. He could see the cross painted on the turret, dirt caked into the seams. A man visible in the hatch, relaxed, unaware that history was about to become very personal. Carpenter armed the launcher. His thumb rested on the switch. The rocket left the tube with a sharp crack that punched through the calm. Fire exploded backward, a sheet of heat missing the wing by inches. For a split second, the Grasshopper felt like it had been kicked. Carpenter didn't wait to see what happened. He hauled back on the stick, pulling the overloaded plane upward with everything it had. The response was slow. Too slow. The ground rushed past underneath. Then the sound changed. Gunfire. German infantry opened up from the roadside. Rifles. Machine pistols. Rounds snapped through the air like tearing cloth. One punched clean through the left wing. Another struck the tail. The plane shuddered, but it stayed together. Barely. Carpenter kept climbing until the firing thinned out. 200 feet. 3. He leveled off and finally looked back. The Panther had stopped. Smoke curled from the engine deck. Not an explosion. Not a dramatic fireball. Just smoke. The kind that meant something inside had gone very wrong. Immobilized. The rest of the column scattered. Tanks rolled off the road. Infantry dove for cover. Men were pointing upward now. shouting. The spell was broken. For the first time, a German tank unit had been attacked by a fabric observation plane with bazookas, and it had worked. Carpenter turned away before they could organize something smarter. He stayed low, following the terrain back toward the airstrip using trees and ridges, like a thief slipping home. When he touched down, the ground, crew ran before the propeller even stopped. They saw the bullet holes first. Then the scorched fabric around the launcher. Burn marks, blackened cloth, but no fire. Someone laughed. A short, sharp laugh like relief escaping. Reloading was fast. No ceremony, no speeches. Rockets slid into tubes. Hands moved quickly. Everyone knew this wasn't over. Carpenter stayed in the cockpit, staring forward, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The Germans had learned something important. The toy plane could bite. And once bitten, they would never ignore it again. The second takeoff felt different. The sky was clearer now. Too clear. The fog that had hidden everything earlier was thinning, and with it went the illusion of safety. Carpenter pushed the Grasshopper forward and felt the damage immediately. Not catastrophic, not yet. But the airplane no longer felt whole. It answered the controls with a slight delay, like it had to think before obeying. He climbed anyway. This time the battlefield was visible. Roads, tree lines, movement that didn't bother hiding anymore. German armor had adjusted. They always did. What Carpenter saw now wasn't a wandering column. It was a formation. More Panthers, half-tracks, infantry moving in coordination, not scattered. Guns already positioned with purpose, not surprise. This wasn't a target of opportunity. This was a response. Carpenter radioed coordinates to artillery. The acknowledgement came back quickly. Fire mission accepted. But artillery doesn't arrive instantly. Shells need time. German tanks don't wait. So he made the decision himself. He turned toward them. The dive began earlier this time. Steeper. Faster. The airframe complained as speed built up. Tracer fire came up almost immediately. Bright red lines, slicing past the cockpit. One struck the fuselage with a metallic crack. Another punched through fabric somewhere behind him. The engine coughed. Just once. Enough to be noticed. Not enough to quit. Carpenter fired and pulled up hard, fighting the controls that felt softer than they should. The plane responded reluctantly, climbing like it was tired of being asked to do impossible things. He circled wide and looked back. One Panther had stopped. Smoke curling from the rear deck. Immobilized, not destroyed. Still dangerous, but no longer moving. Then another. Flames this time. Real fire. Black smoke rising clean and undeniable. 2 hits. A small reward. The price came immediately. The tail felt wrong. Loose. The rudder responded, but not cleanly. The stick had more travel than before, less authority. Somewhere back there, cables were wearing through fabric, was tearing, structure was being asked to lie. And below, the Germans were no longer guessing. Infantry spread out. Guns were repositioned. What looked like improvised anti-aircraft positions began to appear along the roads and tree lines. They weren't shooting wildly anymore. They were waiting. Waiting for the dive. Carpenter knew the equation now. Another attack run would mean flying straight into prepared fire. The Grasshopper was no longer a surprise. It was a problem the enemy was actively solving. He turned away. Low altitude. Terrain masking. Trees sliding past, close enough to count leaves. The engine held, but its rhythm was uneven. A healthy engine doesn't sound like that. A healthy airplane doesn't feel like it's bending around you. He pointed the nose toward home. That's when the radio crackled. A broken transmission. Urgent. Panicked. A waterpoint crew. American soldiers trapped. No heavy weapons. Tanks closing in. Artillery couldn't fire without hitting friendly positions. Air support unavailable. Carpenter stared forward as the message repeated. 20 men. Panther tanks. Minutes. The Grasshopper limped toward the airstrip, every instinct telling him to land, to stop, to survive while he still could. Then he checked his position, distance, fuel, damage, and understood exactly what the message meant. This wasn't a request for help. It was the last thing they had time to send. The engine rattled. The controls felt loose in his hands. The airplane was already coming apart. Carpenter kept flying, but he didn't turn toward home. The radio crackled again, clearer this time, but no less desperate. A water point crew. 20 men. 5 trucks in a clearing. No heavy weapons. Panther tanks closing in fast. Artillery couldn't fire without hitting Americans. Air support was already committed somewhere else. There was no one coming. Carpenter glanced down at his airplane. The left wing carried holes you could see daylight through. The tail fabric fluttered when it shouldn't. The controls felt loose, imprecise, like steering through wet rope. The oil temperature needle sat higher than it had any right to be. The smart decision was obvious. Land. Live. He checked the distance again. Minutes, not miles. The Germans would reach the trucks long before any help could. Carpenter turned the Grasshopper around. The coordinates led him to a small clearing surrounded by trees. He saw the trucks first clustered tight. American soldiers taking cover, where they could, rifles raised in the useless way men hold rifles when armor is coming. Then he saw the Panthers. 4 of them. They weren't rushing. They were advancing with confidence, infantry moving alongside. And when Carpenter approached, they stopped. All 4. Turrets lifted, barrels tilted skyward. The infantry spread out and looked up. They weren't surprised. They were waiting. They had learned. This would not be an ambush. This would be a gunfight between a fabric airplane and everything the Germans could point at the sky. Carpenter climbed, barely clearing small arms range, then rolled into his first dive. The Grasshopper shuddered as speed built. Tracers came up early, stitching the air in front of him. He fired and pulled, but the rocket missed or struck without effect. He didn't see an explosion. He didn't see a tank stop. He did feel the airplane take more hits. The engine temperature climbed into a place it had never been. The vibration changed, turning rough and uneven. Whatever margin he had left was shrinking fast. He pulled away and leveled off, heart-hammering, mind-racing. 1 tank could wipe out those trucks with a single round. 4 could erase 20 men without slowing down. That was when it clicked. They weren't reacting anymore. They were predicting. Every gun was aimed where he had been diving from. They expected altitude. They expected the same move again. Carpenter realized he was fighting an enemy that had solved him. So he broke the pattern. He dropped low. Dangerously low. Treetop. Low. The Grasshopper skimmed along the terrain using trunks and hedges like cover. From the ground, he disappeared. From the sky, he was below firing angles. The engine protested, running hot, rattling like it wanted to quit out of spite. Carpenter popped up suddenly from the side. The first Panther filled his vision. Close, too close for comfort. He fired and pulled with everything he had left. The rocket struck. This time there was no doubt. Flames burst from the engine deck. Black smoke poured out. The tank stopped dead. Crew hatches flew open. Men bailed out, burning, scrambling. 1 down. The Germans hesitated for a heartbeat. That was all he needed. He stayed low and swung toward the second Panther. Machine gun fire tore through the left wing. Fabric ripped free, flapping wildly. The wing held. Somehow. He fired again. The rocket hit the side of the turret. The shaped charge did its work. The tank jerked, then began to burn from within. Ammunition cooked off. The turret shifted crooked wrong. 2 down. The third Panther tried to turn away, backing toward cover. Carpenter lined up, despite controls that felt like they belonged to someone else's airplane. He fired once, saving the rest. The rocket struck the track assembly. Metal snapped. The tank slewed sideways and stopped, immobilized, still alive but out of the fight. 3 stopped. The last Panther was still moving. It was closest to the trucks now, close enough that Carpenter could see American soldiers pressed into the dirt, waiting for a shell that would end everything. The engine coughed, then went silent. For 2 seconds there was nothing. No vibration. No power. Just wind screaming through torn fabric. The propeller stopped turning. Then, miraculously, it caught again. The engine came back, shaking, grinding, dying loudly. Oil smoke poured across the windshield. The temperature gauge pegged red and stayed there. This was it. Carpenter armed everything he had left. All remaining rockets. 1 pass. No second chances. He descended lower than he ever had before. 150 feet. The Panther's turret was turning toward the trucks, lining up a shot. Carpenter could see the commander in the hatch, see his helmet, see him look up. Too late. Carpenter fired. The simultaneous launch nearly tore the wing off. The Grasshopper rolled violently, fighting itself. He wrestled it level as the rockets converged. All 3 hit. The first penetrated the turret side. The second punched into the upper hull. The third detonated against the track. The tank erupted. The turret lifted and separated. The hull split. Fire and smoke swallowed everything. No one escaped. 4 Panthers stopped. 20 Americans alive. Carpenter didn't climb. He couldn't. The engine screamed once more and died completely. Silence. The Grasshopper became a glider, and now survival was a different problem. With the engine dead, the Grasshopper became something it had never been meant to be. A glider. Wind rushed through torn fabric. Oil streaked across the windshield, turning the world into a smeared blur of brown fields and gray sky. Carpenter trimmed for the best glide he could manage. The controls still responded, but sluggishly, like they were deciding how much more they were willing to give him. Altitude was bleeding away fast. The runway at Lawnville came into view, and then the numbers in his head finished the argument. He wasn't going to make it. Not with this sink rate. Not with a plane this damaged. So he picked a field. Plowed earth. Soft ground. No trees. No buildings. Bad for landing gear. Better than dying. The Grasshopper settled toward it, silent except for the wind. Carpenter flared gently. The tailwheel touched first. Then the mains. The ground grabbed hard. The nose pitched forward. The propeller dug into mud, and the airplane flipped. Suddenly he was hanging upside down. Fuel poured from a ruptured tank. The smell hit immediately. Hot metal. Gasoline. The exact combination that ends stories very quickly. Carpenter didn't wait. He released the harness and dropped onto the crushed roof of the cockpit. He kicked at the door. It stuck. Bent. He kicked again harder and it gave way. He crawled out, rolled clear, and ran until his legs stopped working. Seconds later, ground crew reached the wreck. Foam sprayed. Fire never came. For that day, the math worked. 3 sorties. 18 rockets fired. 4 Panther tanks stopped. 2 destroyed. 2 immobilized. 20 American soldiers pulled out alive. 1 L-4 Grasshopper written off completely. The Germans noticed. After that day, observation planes were no longer ignored. Infantry were ordered to shoot at them on sight. Tank crews posted lookouts specifically for low, slow aircraft with strange shapes on their wings. The toy had changed the rules. Carpenter kept flying. He received another Grasshopper 3 days later. Same modifications, same risk, same refusal to wait for permission. He flew dozens more missions. Official records credited him with 6 tanks destroyed. Unofficially, the number was probably higher. Wars are bad at keeping neat score. Then, 1945 arrived. Doctors told Carpenter he had Hodgkin's disease. Terminal. 2 years, maybe less. The war hadn't killed him. Cancer would. Except it didn't. He survived the prognosis, then doubled it, then tripled it. He returned home, went back to teaching history to teenagers who had no idea their teacher once aimed a fabric airplane at tanks. He lived 21 more years. Charles Carpenter died in 1966. His grave marker lists his name, his rank, and his dates. Nothing about bazookas, nothing about panthers, nothing about the day a teacher decided that watching was no longer enough. He survived tanks made of steel. He couldn't outrun time. If this story stayed with you, you're not alone. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if someone in your family served. Stories only disappear when no one remembers them.